Hey, Bobby Manning here. Welcome to Dome Theory number 69. Law Murray is here from The Athletic. Been thrilled to talk to him for some time now. Didn't get around to it last time these two teams played, but we do have two games between the Clippers and the Celtics in the books here. Normally I'm looking ahead at games this time of year. This time we'll take a look back, do some film, talk about both these teams because they're both in really interesting places. Clippers surprisingly good, Celtics stunningly bad. Losers of 8 of 11 now. So, for the people that don't know you, I'm glad to introduce you. And for the people that do, good for you to be here. I mean, you've been one of my favorite people covering the Clippers this year, fairly new to the beat full time with The Athletic there. So, congratulations to that. And great work with the coverage so far this year.
Hey, thank you, Bobby. I really appreciate it. It's kind of surreal. I haven't even done this a full year yet. Um, and it's been, of all years to get into covering a team on an everyday, full time, primary basis, 2021, it's a heck of a year to do it.
So you're traveling. You're not going to Toronto for this next game for obvious reasons. I don't think a lot of people are going to Toronto this year just due to the situation up there in a different country. But I do kind of want to get into what it's like to cover a team. I'm covering the Celtics, mostly here in Boston. I've done a New York trip. I'm probably hopping down to Philly, Washington, doing a few things like that this year. But you've been all over the place this year. There's certainly restrictions that I'm sure you got to stay pretty adherent to if you want to stay out of safety and health, what are they calling it, health and safety protocols
Health and
yourself.
safety
And then there's
protocols,
just,
man.
I've been through the access gauntlet this year too. I don't think people usually care about this stuff, but I think it's pretty interesting just how different covering a team is this year and how you've kind of worked around it.
Well, that's what I mean by 2021 being a crazy year to jump onto a beat full time for the first time in my career. This is all I know. All I know is Zoom. All I know is not being in I'm used to being in locker rooms, but as far as like this an iteration of how I'm covering the team, like I haven't been in a locker room in more than 2 years. Like traveling has been awesome. There are still a lot of cities I haven't been to, even more arenas that I haven't been to. So that's a thrill. And then there's the whole cloud of just we're in a pandemic. That has been the only thing that I could possibly say that is a bummer. It's a huge one, but I've been really fortunate. I'm really glad the Athletic has supported me in getting me to cover the team. You see a lot when you're on the road, when you're not in, unknown territory. You're learning the team just as the team is learning themselves. That's where we're at this part of the year. Now, normally the team would have a pretty good idea of who they are, but this Clippers team, like many teams in the NBA, it's pretty much something different every day.
So,
So
so I've been surprised by them big time for a lot of different reasons. The defense is pretty spectacular. I didn't look at the team and think that they had that level of potential on that end, but I think we're learning year in and year out now that Ty Lue's a pretty good coach, and he's able to pull up guys 3 to 15 and even deeper than that in this kind of year where you have replacement players who are able to do some stuff. Marcus Morris was injured for most of the year, and he steps right back in and starts playing well. Serge Ibaka as well has been out for most of the year, and now is just starting to break back into the rotation. But guys like Brandon Boston, Isaiah Hartenstein, who's kind of been a revelation for them, Terrence Mann and Reggie Jackson becoming a big-time backcourt. That stretches back to last year. And Luke Kennard, who we wasn't looking great there for a while last season, especially is starting to enter the fold here and do some good stuff. I didn't like the Eric Bledsoe trade either. And, they're getting kind of a mixed bag from him, but it's just kind of a collection of stuff. When you don't have Paul George like they haven't for stretches here, and of course, no Kawhi Leonard, you've had to dig deep. And I think this is what really shows the difference between a good coach and a bad coach. And Ty Lue, his career started off as just sort of that LeBron championship that always gets discounted. And now he's sort of making a name for himself as one of the best head coaches here in LA, I think.
yeah, man, that championship, people should have recognized how great Ty Lue was then. Like that Warriors team was unstoppable, and through 4 games of the NBA Finals, they were looking unstoppable in 2016, and then they win 3 in a row, like 2 of them pretty decisively. That is, I thought Ty Lue was stamped then. I mean, Ty Lue was an assistant under Doc Rivers, who I know Boston folk know very well. Same thing with Doc. It's like I don't take championship away from coaches, man. Doc is forever stamped for me. He can't blow another 3-1 lead, and they no, man. They don't take your
He's
championships
trying.
away. They don't take your championships away. Like people can hate on Doc, people can hate on Ty, and they just exposing themselves to me at a certain point. And I guess Ty's had to redefine himself in LA as a head coach. If I didn't think he needed to, but the results have been evident. Even in comparison to Doc, even a coach that I respect and has accomplished a lot with the Clippers, or had accomplished a lot with the Clippers. Ty made immediate changes. And he made guys feel like they were a part of something. And sometimes that's a necessity when you don't have Kawhi and Paul George every game. That was the case last year, and those guys weren't dealing with the kind of injuries that they're dealing with now as we go into a new year. So um, it's important to have a front office, a head coach, and a core of players who are in some kind of lockstep, some kind of same page with what's going on. And that's really been a great thing to see.
And they've made a lot of good moves here. Trading for Zubac, which was just a steal, one of the great steals of the last couple of years here. Picking up Batum for essentially nothing after Charlotte let him go. I almost looked at that for Boston at the time when they were in that Hayward trade talk thing there and said, do you just take Batum? And I think he would have actually looked pretty good here, even on a big, big deal for that one last year. He ends up going to LA and fitting in pretty well here, needing to save his career. And then even just like a draft pick like Boston, who fell so far, a lot of Boston people looked at him and were like, all right, he's falling, grab him. And I think he actually kept sliding past the Celtics there. So they end up sneaking a pick here where they really haven't
I
had
mean,
many draft
you, you
picks.
know,
And
you know, you know, the Celtics like them draft and stash guys.
yeah. I mean, he
Yeah,
has been.
Yamadar 1 year, Beggarin, right?
Begarin has been getting
Disappears.
rave
So
reviews, but we're so far from that. It's
yeah,
just a sign of a good organization. You said before we came on here, like some coaches are handling this year better than others. I think some organizations are handling this year better than others. And the Clippers just they kind of get rave reviews for all of this. And there's a lot of stuff we can talk about here. But if you had to point out like one story out of the start to this year from this team that sticks out the most to you, what would it be?
honestly, it is the defense for me. With so many moving parts, with I don't look at this as hey, they don't have Kawhi. It's like, well, yeah, they don't have Kawhi. Kawhi hasn't played, so I don't really look at Kawhi as a part of the on court product of this team. He is certainly a part of the organization. He is part of what their future is,
Is he
but
gonna
he
play this
is.
year? Should I sneak
I
that one in here?
I mean, that's everyone's question.
hmm
And shoot, I ain't Ollie from Family Guy. You know what I'm saying? I can't tell you. Kawhi told us media day that when he is ready, it's quote, it'll be out in the public. Like Kawhi has a very specific way of terming things. So Kawhi wants to play, and I think that the Clippers are going to support him in his rehab to allow him to play. That makes every single game mean something. Every win is theoretically a win that gets Kawhi closer to play, and every loss is one that theoretically pushes Kawhi away. Not Kawhi like as in himself wanting to come back, just the logistics of it. Look at the
hmm
record. Look at the standings in the West. The West is, what some people would conventionally call a garbage fire right now,
Yeah, and that's helped
compared
for
to
sure.
how most 21st century NBA fans are used to seeing the Western Conference standings. So even in this mess of personnel morass, like they're in a decent spot. Like, they can
They're in play
handle a
for home
five.
court.
Yeah, they can handle a 5-game losing streak and not fall too far off because the West is I mean, the West blows right now. like
Yeah.
like and the Clippers haven't lost that many games in a row. You know, they've lost 3 in a row a couple times, but they haven't lost that fourth game. They haven't dipped below 500 after starting 1-4. So I think Kawhi, he signed the contract that he signed, and he was very open about this on media day because he didn't want the questions of being in a contract year while rehabbing. He
No.
wanted to play, and he cares about this organization. He clearly cares about being a Clipper, wanting to get back on the floor, and the Clippers can't rush him back, but they also, they're not going to rule him out for the year either.
Yeah, and they have slid a little bit over here over this last stretch, but like you said, they can afford to do that. They can afford to be careful with George's elbow, which is probably becoming a little
They
bit of
don't
a
have a
bleeding.
choice.
Yeah.
Paul has a legitimate injury. They
Mm-hmm.
already were careful. Now it's like, well, this ain't they're gonna rest him, and
And that's something
who
he's
knows
had
when
trouble
you
with
see
in
him
the
back.
past. Yeah.
Right.
That's a scary one. And, I think they've been optimistic. You hear what Jerry West is saying and all this stuff about Kawhi. Like, I think there's a power to being optimistic about that just to keep everybody invigorated toward him possibly coming back. Even if it doesn't happen, you're going to end up in a better spot just by playing toward that. But it is tricky timing-wise, right? Because normally that takes about a year. He got hurt pretty deep into the postseason, and that postseason was delayed, like deeper into the summer there.
Right.
So he's up against it for sure, I'd say. Like, I would still be surprised if he's back playing, especially at a high level. And if you're talking about throwing him out there, it's going to be like in the heat of postseason competition, right? Like, there's going to be no easing him in. Maybe he plays off the bench and you play him in a smaller role, but you want him to be.
Kawhi ain't coming off the bench.
You want him to be you want him to be
Kawhi
Kawhi
ain't
when
coming
he's
off the bench, man.
you want him to be
This ain't a
Kawhi when
role
he's back.
player.
Yeah, and so you're
Yeah,
not rushing that. He's signed long term. George is locked in there. So even if you got to just have like a Cinderella run this year, feel good about yourself, and then come back next
exactly.
year and actually contend. Like, that's probably the smart way to do it.
Look, this year the pressure was on the Clippers last season. Okay, they had to respond to blowing a 3-1 lead and doing it in a fashion that caused some fissures within the whole organization, the players, the coaching staff. They had to change coaches. That's not something they wanted to do, but that's something that they felt like they needed to do. And then even then, like there was jokes coming from the outgoing coach about didn't do that much to change the roster. They let the sixth man of the year sign elsewhere, and of course, the elsewhere turned out to be across the hall, and they bring in one of Kawhi's guys who turned out to be, not 100% at any point in Serge Ibaka. And they had a lot of questions that they had to consistently respond to. And they did that. They did that in the regular season. They did that in the postseason, 3 different rounds. Even in the conference finals, they lost it, but they competed, even though they were shorthanded, not even beyond Kawhi Leonard. Obviously, again, Serge was out. So this is a team this year. They have their contracts locked in. They got the good vibes going. And the only thing really that the Clippers need to do is to maintain that. It's one thing to build a culture. It's one thing to restructure something, but it's another thing to manage relationships over the course of a year. That is difficult. That's something that gets taken for granted all the time. And you see teams that seemingly look like they had it all together, and by the end of the year, they can't stand each other, or something else is going on, and then you got to rebuild your culture all over again. That's a
And
challenge.
And I would love covering this team. Like, you just think of all the different stories down the roster, whether it's Man becoming what he's become out of Florida State, and so many of those Florida State guys have become awesome players at this point, and he kind of headlines them there. Marcus Morris, I guess the announcers call him senior. The Clippers
Yeah,
announcers, like, that's
yeah.
become a
Ain't
whole
a lot
thing
of
around
seniors
him.
in the NBA, man.
I love Morris. I loved him in his time here. He was like screaming in LeBron's face and Thompson and like all the stuff he does just for a team on the
I
court
mean, he
and
from my
just
he from my hometown.
oh man.
We both from Philly.
And then,
Only,
when the playoffs
you
come
know,
around, Markieff is going to be there. Like, well, he's going to be in the playoffs himself with the Heat, but that was something you had when Markieff was, I forget where he was at that point, but Marcus was in the playoffs with the Celtics, and you had Markieff there sitting front row in his
Washington. Yeah, I
jersey.
remember those. Yeah, I remember Markeith would come through. I hope Markeith gets well. It's a damn shame that he hasn't played in
That
more
was
than a month
weird, huh?
due to the whiplash with that altercation with Jokic. So that's I'm not passing judgment. Like I just hope that he is going to be able to get back on the floor. It's not
Yeah,
his first neck neck issue. So there's added concern there with Markeith.
he did tweet out something optimistic the other day, which was good. But man, that did start pushing 30 games this week, which is nuts. Just the amount of time he's missed there. So yeah, like I said, this is just a fun team to cover. The Celtics are not. It's just a slog every single day that either leads you toward
Man, it's
a
like that every year with them.
yeah, you're either left with a blowing it up discussion or some sort of trade machine thing, or just misery, saying everybody stinks up and down the roster for an hour and trying to play the blame game. They've moved toward the coach, the fans have, over the last couple weeks here. They've obviously already changed coaches within the last week or so here. So that's not fun. Like, I'd much rather talk about this good vibes you're talking about with the Clippers here and just like what they're becoming in LA. You've written about the Clippers in past spots. I don't know like how big of a fan you were in the past of the Clippers or like what kind of your connection is to the team there, but it's always interesting with them, right? Because it's a Lakers town. The Clippers are trying to carve out their own brand here, but I find it interesting for a writer like you, who you kind of find yourself writing for. Is there a growing contingency of Clippers fans in LA? Are they kind of scattered all over the place? Like, what have you noticed in terms of the people who are
I
drawn to
mean,
your coverage closest?
like I'm from the East Coast, and I'm also a kind of a troll, so I don't really subscribe to being a fan of any one team. My loyalty absolutely is suspect. So
Uh
if I say I'm a fan of you one week, I might not be a fan of you the next week.
huh.
So I just want to put that out there. You know, I resist being too close to one team. You know what I'm saying? If I was one of the X-Men, man, I don't know which one I'd be, but I definitely wouldn't be in a faction for very long. So I hop and skip, man. I'm just here for the jokes and the vibes. That's how I've always been.
Yeah.
um, and when it comes to the Clippers, like I caught to the Clippers, my first year was the last year they actually had a losing record. But that was also the first year Blake Griffin was playing NBA basketball, coming off of his Clippers integrated sabbatical because you can't have a number one pick without them having some kind of delay with the Clips. So of course he misses his rookie year. He comes and plays. He jumps over a car, wins rookie of the year. All Star was in LA that year too. I mean, the Clippers were to me more exciting than the Lakers were in the 2010-11 season. That was my first year in LA, and of course
I
I
think they
hadn't liked.
still are.
I mean, I look if you're just being real, like the Clippers have. I mean, it's not a big thing to say the Clippers have been the better team. Like the Lakers have had one season where they advanced further than the Clippers since 2011, and that was obviously in the bubble.
Mhm.
So again, I don't take championships away, and but the reality is like the Clippers, they've been the better basketball team. The fact is, people don't care about who is a better team in the current day in a period of time. People are going to get their jokes off. They're going to get their confirmation bias off, and that's that. Goalposts will get moved. So, I mean, there are just like there are people who walk in LA. There are people who appreciate the Clippers in LA. So there are people who appreciate the Clippers beyond LA. Like people want to see the Clippers play. Um, Maybe not as much this year with Kawhi being hurt. The national TV scheduling has reflected that. But it's been a decade. The Clippers are the only team in the NBA that has had a winning season every single season since the lockout. I don't think people realize that. Yeah, they only have one conference finals appearance to show for it. They haven't been to the NBA finals. They've never won a championship. All this is stuff that you could have said before 2010. Like the reality is, covering the team, there's always something going on. There's they for the most part they are a exciting team. Like um it's there's a lot I can say about it, but one thing I will always resist. I don't want people thinking like I'm just like a singular fan of the team. Like I'm a fan of basketball, I'm a fan of players. Sometimes I'm a fan of stories, not all the time, but sometimes, right? That's what I care about. I don't want people, to be like, um, you'll be disappointed if you're following me because I'm going to be a homer for the team that I cover. Like that ain't happening.
Yeah, that's generally where I'm at with the Celtics at this point. There's kind of especially for me, and I did grow up being a Celtics fan. There's a coldness kind of to seeing under the hood a little bit, seeing how things operate, seeing just what kind of this
Yeah,
has become organizationally here. Like I'm not crazy about the way the team's kind of conducted itself over the past couple of years here. Like, the fan in me looks at it and wants to see some things change here, and that makes it all the more easier for me to go in on them a little bit when it's necessary. Because this has been a mess. This has been bad. Rock bottom, one of many this year was last night, and you were there in Boston.
yeah, I
I'm sure you
saw it.
heard. I'm sure you heard the fans and what people were saying. Because listen, the Celtics fans, even the diehards, aren't liking this team very much either right now. 9.5% from three, which is just a startling number. I did like all the different stat head things there. The only other the only other game I found quite like that was the Rockets, of course, in February of last year. I think shooting
Yeah,
8.3% on a similar volume.
yeah, that's a
Not much
similar. That's
historically
all you need.
compares. Yeah, so that was awful. I know you kind of wrote that the Clippers deserve a little more credit defensively for learning into that and such, but at some point, if you're the Celtics, you have to look at that and say, let's just stop jacking these. And I do get some film here I think we'll dive into a little bit, but that was bad from my perspective. You probably feel a little bit better about it just knowing what the Clippers have done defensively this year in that zone. But I've also looked at the Celtics against the zone the last couple of years, and it has not been a pretty sight.
Yeah, and I'll say this: I didn't write that piece last night to give the Clippers more credit for any defense they played. Because if you look at that piece, like the players themselves were like, "Yo, they just missed shots." Like the Celtics could have shot 25% from three and not change anything else, and they might have blown the Clippers out. Like, let's just be real about that. Like the Celtics, it's not that they were bad shooting threes; it's that they had the worst shooting 3-point game that in their entire franchise history. Like they had to
Mm-hmm.
be spectacularly bad getting the shots that you get. You gotta some teams you can't play the kind of zone that the Clippers played for as much as they played it because of the professional level shooting, semi-professional level shooting. You know what I mean? Every one of the Celtics that played last night was in training camp for that team. That's the craziest thing about it. Every single one, even Sam Hauser. As soon as Sam Hauser got into the game, I was like, that bull has one job. And he made his first three, but then he missed his last two because, um, that's how it was going to be. Like the Clippers, what I felt like that people need to understand is the circumstances that they had to win that game. Like they're learning how to win with lineups that they had no plans of playing for extended periods of time or at all, even when this month of December started. Forget training camp, forget what your plans were coming out of the preseason. Like just this month, you got guys playing in positions or being on the roster at all that you weren't thinking of 3 weeks ago. And like Eric Bledsoe, for instance, people can't stand Eric Bledsoe. New Orleans Pelicans fans, they really can't stand Eric Bledsoe. I think even the media be bagging on this dude. But he was important last night. Even with the air ball that he shot in the middle of the fourth quarter, wide open, mid range, as if somebody let the doors open to the garden. You know what I'm saying? Like he was the biggest factor down the stretch for the Clippers, and that's saying something. So, like, I really had to point that stuff out because, again, these rosters, these games, it's something different every single day. I mean, we learned today that if it's a Zubats isn't going to play in Toronto because he's in health and safety protocols. That dude never misses games. But it was if it's a Zubats' verticality on Jalen Brown that Ty Lue challenged. If he doesn't challenge that, or if it's overturned for some reason, Jalen's at the line, 2 free throws, and the Celtics have the lead. Instead, the Celtics don't get to shoot those free throws. They never went to the line again. They never made a three again. The Celtics never led again. That was a tough win, even with the fact that the Celtics missed as many threes as they did.
Yeah, and there's just some little stuff from Boston, and I didn't think Brown was awful in this one. There's jokes about him flying around just after 0 assists and 36 shots, whatever it was, a staggering line for himself historically in his own right. But, he got the ball moving against the zone, found the open spots like he did here. And I thought Scal pointed this out on the Celtics broadcast pretty well, just the way the Celtics were crashing the boards here, letting the Clippers completely leak out in this spot. There were a couple of times where they left Luke Kennard wide open, over rotating and things like that. So the Celtics are trying to be this defensive team, and they're not really doing that good of a job in that regard either. And they had to mix in some guys who aren't as sharp in that area. That kind of brings in the question the balance of offense and defense that Celtics fans talk about all the time here. But like they just can't find the sweet spot between them. And something's so off
Yeah.
with this group where they can emphasize defense one game, but that's not going to last. They can emphasize offense for a West Coast trip. That's not going to last. You can play the shooters like they did yesterday with Hauser and Pritchard and some of the guys on the roster that are better in that regard.
And too many of them shooters didn't shoot. That's the
Yeah.
problem. I
And
actually
so
think the Celtics defense is. I like the Celtics defense. I know they've had some really weird, stupid games. Jalen Noel going off the game before. I saw that, and
Brandon
when
Boston.
right, Brandon Boston, obviously, but I've seen them make adjustments either game to game or in Brandon's case quarter to quarter. Like that Celtics game in LA 3 weeks ago was one of the most bizarre games because the Clippers built this huge lead and then Marcus Smart and Dennis Schroeder turned up the ball pressure and I mean it was leading to dunk turnover, leading to dunk repeatedly in that second half. Like it was ridiculous to watch the Clippers, watch Reggie Jackson, a guy that I'm pretty damn sure the Boston Celtics wanted to sign this offseason, consistently not be able to get past half court. Like Marcus Smart just made him so uncomfortable. Um, like I feel like they have the personnel, and the issue is just the consistency game to game. I think Ime Udoka has mentioned that. Unfortunately, that's been the most consistent
in the
part of the
fourth quarter.
Celtics. The Ime
I mean,
Udoka getting upset with them over something.
yes, and fans get mad at him in turn. I think some have just said, like, you're just going to keep saying the same stuff over and over. You're actually going to make some adjustments here. And he's made a few. Like, at
I don't
times, I
think
think they've.
there's a lot of options to make adjustments. Like the
No, there
roster is what
isn't.
it is.
Like,
They were 7th seed last year for a reason.
and I just don't. I've kind of gone back and forth about it. Like, yes, the Neesmiths and the Pritchards of the world and the Hausers, like those are your best shooters, but none of them have a large sample size of doing it over big minutes against starting lineups, and that doesn't always translate. And I can't blame a coach for saying Josh Richardson's better than these guys. We're going to play Richardson and Schroeder and some of these other types over them. So that's something he's balancing, and he has made a good defense out of it. It's just the lack of consistency and execution in the fourth quarter, especially where they ranked 29th in net rating. They're as bad as the Knicks, Blazers defensively. They're among the worst teams offensively in those spots too. That's where it just comes down to, can one guy step up in these instances and actually pull them out of this? And that's why I think people are starting to rightfully look at the core of the team and saying, all right, what's the nucleus of this? Like, is this actually going to work if they get healthy, if they find a supporting cast? Are they going to come through in tight circumstances where the game gets hard and they have to make a play or two here? Listen, when there was 2.5 minutes left in this game yesterday and they were down 4, I'm like, just go get it. Like, it's right there. You're as good as the Clippers, if not better. Go get it. And instead, they lose by 9. And that happens over and over again with this group. So at what point do you look at, I don't know what you want to call it, blowing it up, shaking it up, whatever level you want to go on that meter? Like, are the Celtics there already?
It's all bizarre to me because, again, as a Philadelphia native, as someone who has a group text with the homies, like it's just really like how much credit did the Celtics get for getting the guys that they got? They didn't have to lose to get Jaylen Brown. They didn't have to lose to get Jason Tatum. You know, they pick swapped the Nets of all teams, the Brooklyn Nets, who I'm literally watching play the Sixers right now in Brooklyn. You know what I'm saying? Obviously it worked out for the Nets because of who they got in free agency. But I mean, let's just be real. The Celtics were supposed to have won because they got actual good top three pick talent, in back to back drafts and at a position that I feel like is the most valuable in the NBA. We're always trying to decrease the importance of the big men in the NBA. We're always talking about, oh, this point guard does this. It's a point guard's league, but in reality, the rules have created the point guard play. That's why if you have a list of 30 teams and you just list their point guards, you're probably happy with point guard number 20 on that list because the league is oversaturated with talent and what that talent can do in today's game. The wings, if you have if you have dynamic wings, that's where you can really do something special in the league. And damn it, the Celtics have two of them. I cover a team with two of them, in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, and it's like you keep that. You keep that. Don't blow. If there's a quote unquote blow it up, it's got to be something around Tatum and Brown. Now, I will say this: Tatum and Brown, there's one issue that I consistently have with those guys, and you mentioned it earlier briefly. Neither one is a good enough playmaker. I watched Jason Tatum play without Jaylen Brown in LA 3 weeks ago, and he struggled to make the right play consistently. He struggled to protect the basketball. Jaylen does a slightly better job of protecting the ball, but Jaylen still is not a natural playmaker either.
He has more
And one
assists
of those
he has more turnovers than assists this year, actually, at this point. So
that's what I'm saying. Like
yeah.
one of those guys has to develop some kind of playmaking, and that takes a while for some guys. It took a while for PG and Kawhi. It took Kawhi until last year with playing for Ty Lue, and actually that a process that started the year before with Ty as an assistant and Doc coaching Kawhi for Kawhi to be a playmaker for others on par with some of the elite wings. That was the final piece for Kawhi. PG, same thing. It took PG working with Chauncey Billups to really be like Ty basically told those dudes, you guys want a better point guard? Y'all do it. And I don't
And that's
know
what Ime's telling these guys, yeah.
exactly. And that is a process. It takes some time. These guys are outstanding talents, but they're young. The other guys on there either aren't as talented. Actually, none of them are as talented. And some of them, they're either past their primes or never had primes worth a damn to begin with. That's where the question is for the Celtics. I think their defense is fine, but it's clear. And the Celtics know this. They knew it in the offseason. They have point guard issues, and their stars, they don't have the ability right now to compensate for that. The big swing factor for the Celtics' future is one or both of those guys figuring that out in the timeline that they have set for themselves.
So what's the best way that they can help them? Because I agree. Yeah, you can't give those guys up. You're selling low if you are. In fact, Zach Lowe kicked around deals today that on his podcast that shouldn't get anyone too excited, like Melton and Bane from Memphis. In fact, that will make Celtics fans rip their hair out because they drafted Bane and gave him up to dump Ennis Cantor. So like selling low for Brown just to bring him back to town, I don't think would have anybody too excited. You got your 1-for-1 deals that I don't think are that realistic, like Lillard, like Beal. I think those teams would actually want more than Brown in those circumstances to give up their stars, just because teams don't give up their stars. Like they really have to be enticed to do it. They're starting over essentially if they're doing that. And then Simmons, I mean, I just roll my eyes at that one because how are you going to trade Brown for Simmons when I think Brown's better than
Oh, that would be
Simmons.
hilarious because I heard I know
That's
Celtics
what Philly
fans
fans are begging
love.
for.
Yeah, I know Celtics fans, they love to get on Simmons' inadequacies, and that would be chef's kiss if Ben Simmons were to go to Boston, whether he's good or not. Like, oh man, I would love to see that. I would
I'm not
love to
counting
see
on
that.
that one. I don't think the Celtics would get more in that deal either, the way Warriors handled this. He actually thinks
Yeah,
Simmons should be the guy that the Celtics are giving up more for, and other teams are. And you see the trade demands he's had from Golden State and other
yeah.
groups. Like, it's
But
not. Go ahead.
here's the thing though. Like, I'm not big on trading, big pieces for star point guards. Like, unless it's, you know, the Chris Paul level star like that. But that makes sense because of what the Suns gave up and the timeline that they're on. You see
I
what I'm
think
saying? Like,
everybody would go back and do the Paul thing if they could in retrospect.
yeah, like so another like with the Celtics, it's like don't give up your big piece to like find a way to get a competent point guard, but then you have to support that too. Like they've had Kemba Walker, they've had Kyrie Irving. Hell, they had Isaiah before, they got the best of Isaiah Thomas. Like
They had Hayward,
what
who had some point guard qualities to him.
yeah, I thought Hayward was really good for the Celtics. And clearly Gordon saw what it was with Jalen and with Jalen, and Gordon was like, "I'm still a player who can do more," and he's done that. I know people love to talk about Lamelo, but I think what really makes the Charlotte Hornets go is the fact that they got a guy on the wing in Gordon Hayward who consistently gets it done when he's on the floor. Everyone remembers Lamelo getting hurt, but damn it, when Gordon Hayward got hurt, they weren't able to replace that level of production. I don't think Gordon made it back. LaMelo made it back. I don't think Gordon made it back, and that's what kept the Hornets, who were hovering top four for a long time last season, out of the playoffs entirely. They got
Yep.
blasted in the play-in by a team that wound up replacing their coach for the second year in a row, for crying out loud. Like, people forget that Gordon Hayward is really good, and what can Gordon Hayward do that Jalen and Jason were saying needs to develop?
Yep.
Gordon, you
Pass.
can give him the ball, and he can make the right play consistently.
I think there's a chance this team could have won the championship if he didn't get hurt in the bubble there. I mean, they were rolling. Maybe they don't
Yeah,
beat Miami. There's certainly a case they don't beat LA. But they would have been there. I mean, they beat LA pretty badly earlier that season and then stuck right with them in the road game at Staples.
it's
Now,
about the wings, man.
crypto. Um, can I ask you this before we get you out of here? I asked Justin this last week. This is generic, but I do kind of like hearing the outside perspective on it. What would you do if you were Brad Stevens right now, if you were the GM of the Celtics, to start to address these things? If you're not giving up ground,
I mean, shoot, like
you train
that's
smart, you train Rob, these picks. There's a couple
Brad
ways you
Stevens
can go
must
about
really
this.
love Boston because this dude was like, "All right, I shouldn't coach a team anymore, but I really want to be in Boston." He even called himself an asshole. Like when everyone was like, "Hey, you gonna go back to Indiana, right?" Like somebody would voluntarily go back to
Dunkin'
Indiana and shit.
Donuts, yeah, that was a
You know,
great quote.
no shade, no shade to Indiana. I haven't been in that town yet, and I can't wait to go next month. To be honest with you, but I'm just talking about the situation. Like guys don't go to college, when they got great NBA situations. Like
I
let's
know,
just be
especially with how
real.
college
You
is
know what I'm
looking right
saying?
now.
Exactly. So Brad took on a really difficult role and a really difficult time. Like guys, I guess we got a trade going down tomorrow. So sound the alarm. But it took until the last day of December for a trade of any kind to happen, and that's not an accident. Like again, you got damn near 100 players, probably more than 100. I'm not keeping tabs, but you got that many players who weren't in training, who either weren't in training camps or certainly weren't on opening day rosters, who are playing games in the NBA right now. This isn't even 10-day contract season, but it's now modified 10-day contract season because of the pandemic and because of the Omicron variant. That makes being a general manager very difficult at this time of year. If you're Brad Stevens, what? You're going to have phone calls with GMs who are trying to find the ninth and 10th guy on the roster to play a game and keep it from being postponed. That's really difficult. So good luck to Brad Stevens. Honestly, I would kind of stand pat and just hope that you can get more time with Jason and Jalen on the floor at the same time. One thing the Clippers didn't see, and byproduct I didn't see, is you didn't see Jason and Jalen in the same game against the Clippers. Like, I mean, the Clippers aren't going to apologize for it. Again, the
Yeah,
Celtics
in
didn't
either
see
game.
Kawhi or PG in either game, right? But that is the thing. If you got a team with stars, you want to get those stars playing together. It didn't happen in the postseason last year. It hasn't happened often this year because of issues related to either COVID or injury. And I look at Jalen last night and I see a guy who's still trying to find his rhythm. As simple as that. And guess what? Jason Tatum's going to come back, a dude who already had COVID, and you saw what the effects of it last year that it had on him. He overcame that, but it's about consistency. It's about continuity. And I think the one thing Brad Stevens should do is he needs to really support his head coach, because it's clear that Ime's going through it right now. They picked him. There's a reason they picked him. I think Ime deserved to have a head coaching job, and he's got really difficult circumstances. I don't think a trade, especially one for pennies on the dollar, helps that Boston team in the short term, and it certainly might not help them in the long term.
Development's going to be important from Ime's perspective. They kind of got to see what they get with these young guys. I'm at that point in the season. That's probably the season this is becoming. And Brown and Tatum, that's a development thing too, like you talked about for the whole show. They have to get the reps playmaking. I know people went crazy this week at Brown's performance as the lead ball handler, but there's only one way you improve in that aspect. And your comparison to Kawhi and George was great. Like, those are guys who did it and got to that point. And that's what these guys have to get to ultimately. You hope you have the time with the contracts, because after this season, you do start looking at Brown's free agency in 2025 as something that's in the distant future. I think it's 24 or 25, one of those years. You're 2 years away. So you don't have unlimited time there. There's probably some things you have to do around the edges. You got to get these guys shooters. I don't know where Smart's future is with this team. I'd love him to be in Boston forever, because I do think there's all those defensive things and intangible things that he brings that are important, but as your third best
Yeah.
player on the depth chart.
If Marcus is coming off your bench, you're in a great spot. The problem with Marcus is, if you think of him as the guy coming out of Oklahoma State as a point guard, scorer, a guy who could shoot, clearly that's not Marcus. Marcus Smart, and the contracts have dictated this, has rebranded himself in as a guy who is a core piece, a guy who should be playing every night, but not a guy who you need to make plays with the ball. If he's coming off your bench, he is one of the best assets you can have. But I mean, they asked him to start, and what you get is a good defensive team that has some serious issues offensively.
Oh,
That's
especially when you throw
that's what you
Schroeder
have.
into that. I mean, that backcourt, that's as bad shooting as you'll find
Yep.
between two guards. Um,
And why do they have Shooter? Because they couldn't get Reggie, and because they had to get off of Kemba, and because like it's been a revolving door. Point guard's been a revolving door in Boston, pretty much ever since Brad got there. Like, I remember when Jordan Crawford was the was the main piece for that team,
I'm
man. Like,
glad you got that reference there in your
so
arsenal.
yeah, man. Like that's just been the case, though, right? It's been damn near a decade, and it's just been since they let Rondo go, since Rondo's ACL tear. It's
Smart had a
been who's going
previous
to be
stint
at
as
point
starter
guard.
too. Yeah, Isaiah
Yeah,
was coming off the bench. Smart was starting in that first playoff year. You're so right, and they never
yeah,
established something there. The Kyrie thing, you wish it worked. I mean,
yeah.
that's
It did work until he got himself hurt, and then he came
until he
back,
left.
and yeah, well, he
Till
came
he
back, and he
decided to
was a
walk out
he
the
was a
door.
problem.
Yeah.
You know,
But that's a great one there. You got to find some stability at that spot. I'm not sure Smart is gonna be that. So you start to look at that one a little bit there, and there's an Indiana thing here I'm considering a little bit on the Brown front. I'm with you on Brown. I just don't think you make that move. But if there is something out there, it's probably something that looks like Sabonis, uh, Brogdon, maybe some picks or something there that you
well,
can jump
Brogdon ain't
off and
going
make
nowhere
another
this
move.
year.
Yeah, in the
So
offseason. I don't think there's any in-season trade that's going to save the Celtics here. Maybe you dump Schroeder, get that thing handled because he's not coming back probably. So that's probably your in-season thing here. But beyond that, like, you're usually not saving your franchise in season. That's just not stuff that happens at the trade deadline. Transformative stuff. But who knows? This year's weird. You got that Kyrie thing going on. You got the Simmons thing going on. Portland's in flux. Indiana. Like, this could maybe be a big trade deadline year, possibly.
I'd be shocked. Just like I said, the rosters are so all over the place. I don't know
Oh
how
yeah,
these front
that's the other
office.
factor.
I don't even know how these front offices make that happen. Like
That's
again,
not changing.
the only reason you're getting a trade likely tomorrow is because of something really unfortunate with Ricky. I mean, I feel so bad for Ricky Rubio and for that franchise because they did it the right way, rebuilding and everything. And this is the second time that Ricky's torn that ACL. Like if Ricky doesn't tear his ACL, I don't think we're talking about Rondo getting traded anywhere.
Colin Sexton as well. That was a tough one for them
Right,
earlier in the year.
right.
But yeah, great conversation with Law Murray. Go check out his coverage. He is killing it on the Clippers beat. Enjoyed talking to him here today. He is at Law Murray, LAWMURRAY, the new NUTHENU, Law Murray, the new on Twitter. And of course at theathletic.com as well. Stay safe, my man. Keep killing it. Keep racking up the miles for the rest of the year. And hopefully we'll talk to you again in the postseason, maybe.
All right. Hey, thank you, Bobby. And, be safe. Enjoy the rest of whatever 2021 has, and bless you in 2022.
Happy New Year, man. Happy New Year, all the listeners. This is the second and last time you'll hear us. We do have something coming tomorrow special that I'll drop on the Twitter page. Follow at Dome Theory. Subscribe, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you get those. And, of course, stay tuned to CLNSmedia.com for the Celtics coverage as well. Garden Report back tomorrow afternoon for Celtics Suns, 1 p.m. tip there. We will see you then.